3, 2, 1, it's jam.
Out of context, suggesting your show is the genesis of a new genre entirely might sound, at best, arrogant or pretentious. It's a lofty mission statement, but the sentiment behind Sunrise's opening manifesto went on to define not only their new project's legacy of transcending genres and breaking the mold, but its enduring prophecy of cheap imitation. Cowboy Bebop came out in 1998, the wavering end of anime's creative Wild West, and took advantage of its freedom to declare itself something entirely new. The series was met with nothing but acclaim, becoming one of the biggest anime of all time in the West. But what makes it interesting is that if you ask 100 people who say they love it, why they love it, you'll probably get 100 different answers, and all of them unusually vague. Historically, people aren't great at expressing their opinions with anything but noise, but Cowboy Bebop is especially hard to sing any kind of articulate praises for, because we aren't really hardwired to grasp just what makes it special. That might make Cowboy Bebop sound like some kind of abstract, avant-garde think piece, but it's not, and it's not really a deconstruction either. It's just, for lack of a better phrase, inside out. There's a marked difference between entertainment value and artistic value, and that's already a complicated distinction I'm really not qualified to teach a class in. But achieving one without sacrificing the other is more a question of function than form. Any story can work in a vacuum as long as the storyteller knows how it can be effective, and Cowboy Bebop's biggest strength is its restraint. At the surface level, its appeal is the cool factor. The music is jazzy and memorable, the action is fluid and thrilling, and the characters are all, in a word, cool. But cool doesn't make a masterpiece. Altered Carbon was a cool future punk story, but it was vapid and meandering, and ultimately lost its viewership because it was so hard to care about. I'm really not here to dunk on Altered Carbon either. The airy, humanist themes associated with future punk aren't something easy to reconcile with audiences. The staying power of Cowboy Bebop, what truly makes it so iconic, is the inversion of its narrative. Traditional stories, as most of us know them, for example the hero's journey, follow a fairly formulaic path. This path is based on our own collective experience, an interplay of build-up and catharsis that we can relate to through basic pathos and functional patterns. Cowboy Bebop isn't interested in your experience, and it throws out traditional storytelling in favor of a drifting sense of weight. To say Cowboy Bebop is aimless or even ineffectual is, by a certain standard, technically correct, but really only negative in the context of the specifically structured way narratives are expected to play out, especially in the West. At the start of the series, each main character has more or less already passed the end of their traditional character arc, having lost the chance to resolve their conflicts, and now instead haunted by their pasts. As opposed to traditional motivations which move characters forward as we grow to care more for them, these lost souls have defining burdens designed specifically to hold them in place. We, as the audience, are perpetual outsiders, another member of the Bebop's loose definition of a crew, subject to the same missing dynamic and pervading emptiness that looms over the heads of bounty hunters. Each episode, in line with director Shinichiro Watanabe's original pitch for Cowboy Bebop as a film, is treated more or less as a self-contained narrative. Spike, Jet, and Faye are often more so side characters in someone else's story rather than the true focus, leaving them to helplessly watch others suffer the same mistakes they did. Even the focus episodes that Jet and Faye get to flesh out their backstories are purposely left unresolved, as they come to realize they won't find the closure they're looking for. Through this, they lift their burdens and start what could be considered a new story. Their lack of dynamic shifts, their stagnated and often cryptic dialogue becomes open and honest, offering, if nothing else, a chance to grow. Spike, on the other hand, has no moment of clarity. His position as the protagonist is to embody obsession and denial, to be the conduit for a living past. He lacks any regard for his own life, in fact, almost actively seeking death, laughing in its face like a child playing in a sandbox. His devil-may-care demeanor, probably the most misunderstood aspect of his character, is a product of that state of mind. There's a spring in his step, but only when he's fighting. There's no light in his eyes, no blood pumping. Spike isn't a hero, he's a shell. And when there's nothing left to live for, finding something to die for becomes exponentially easier. With that in mind, the character of Julia, his whole purpose, is meant to be nothing to the audience, a cardboard cutout, a walking ghost with no weight or consequence. She represents a past we don't understand or care about, at least not beyond the way we relate to Spike, as someone desperate to take back the better life they watch slip away. She dies unceremoniously, almost immediately, because she embodies something already lost. This is how Spike's story ends, has to end even. With nothing left, absolutely nothing at all, Spike resolves to end the story himself, because, in a way, it's already gone on much too long. Rendered down to its simplest form, Cowboy Bebop isn't really an active narrative. It's a show about passivity, or maybe more so futility, and the consequences of remaining an embattled part of your story long past the final chapter. Spike is a tragic character, one who refuses his arc in search of a better one, and he pays the price for it. By definition, he can't grow or change because the story can only move backwards. That concept, a completely inverted narrative, just isn't something we're hardwired to understand. And that's why so many creators, particularly in the West, fail to recreate Cowboy Bebop's appeal.
I felt like I was watching a dream I'd never wake up from. Before I knew it, the dream was all over.
Cowboy Bebop is, as an influence, often misunderstood or misrepresented, superficially lifted without a deeper understanding of the series' beating heart. Sometimes it works alright, but more often than not leaves a massive hole in which the context of the original work was supposed to go. So first, let's briefly talk about Firefly. If ever there was a show that blatantly wore Cowboy Bebop on its sleeve, for better and for worse, it was Firefly. And all things considered, it was a pretty good show, but there's no better example of a show that couldn't quite do what Cowboy Bebop did. Now, Joss Whedon never even hinted at any influence from Watanabe or from Cowboy Bebop as a whole, but as far as space westerns go, there really aren't many stories more conceptually intertwined. Whedon's stoic, aloof crew, drifting about the never-changing humanist void of space in their crappy ship, shooting the occasional verbal darts at each other and eating with chopsticks and tin, all feel exceedingly Bebop, but ring, at least comparatively, hollow. Maybe it was the realistic way they depicted the silence of space, or the painfully surface-level influence of Chinese culture, or maybe it was all just Fox's fault. We'll never actually know whether Firefly would have been worth its salt in the end because, like Cowboy Bebop, it was distrusted by the studio that owned it, treated like a disposable experiment, and aired out of order for arbitrary reasons. It was cancelled after one season and lives on only as a cult classic and also a sort of sequel movie. But that was a different time, in which networks ruled the Western media landscape and adventurous ideas were shelved in favor of more Law and Order spin-offs. And then came Netflix. Live-action anime adaptations are, by and large, abominations. Issues of whitewashing aside, Hollywood has a tendency to haphazardly mold the source material to fit Western styles, assuming everything will be fine as long as viewers get the broad strokes. This method of Frankensteining a westernized anime plot has literally never worked, but stops no one from thinking that this time for sure, be it something as expansive and culturally specific as Akira, or in this case as deeply idiosyncratic as Cowboy Bebop, it's most definitely going to work. The team behind the live-action Cowboy Bebop has already gone on record as saying they'll be doing hour-long episodes and telling a serialized story. It's something you would expect from a live-action sci-fi drama in the modern world of television, but already separating itself from what made the original work so well. Serialized suggests a full and slowly progressing arc for the protagonists, the way stories are usually told, but not the way Cowboy Bebop was told. And I should mention, regarding the elephant in the room of the live-action decisions made, I actually think the casting of John Cho is a really good choice. He's proven to be a very talented physical actor who can express a surprising range of complex and nuanced emotions using just his face. You know, like Spike Spiegel did. But the fact that the creative team apparently only had the criteria of Asian and cool for him kind of speaks for itself as to how deeply they understand the characters they're adapting. Pushing aside, at least for now, the implication that a live-action reboot of Cowboy Bebop might suggest there's any particular reason not to just watch the original, the bigger issue at hand remains that Netflix probably can't tell this story right. Reboots aren't an inherently bad idea, but they're meant for narratives with broad appeal that can constantly find something slightly new to say. James Bond, Batman, even gender-swapped romantic comedies make sense when retold with a fresh spin or a new style. Cowboy Bebop doesn't fit any mold. It is, as it says, a new genre itself. Well, it's not new anymore, but it is still singular because no one has been able to replicate it. That leaves Netflix with two choices: recreate the original, which is effectively pointless, or try to do something new, which makes it inherently and evidently not Cowboy Bebop. It's not set in stone that Netflix's adaptation will be bad, but if I was a betting man, I'd put everything on disappointment. Dozens of shows have tried to be almost Cowboy Bebop, and none of them have ever pulled it off. Simply slapping the brand name on another sci-fi western feels like the ultimate evolution of the Sunrise Session remixes, sampled at face value and reproduced with half of the charm and none of the context. In all likelihood, we'll probably never see our space cowboy again. I mean, we will, thanks to Netflix, but I mean it in more of a conceptual sense. Cowboy Bebop was very carefully written, planned out in detail, with the beginning and the end established first. It succeeded in creating a new genre by throwing out preconceptions and building from the ground up. By keeping its characters stationary, Sunrise had the opportunity to instead mold their styles, situations, and obviously their genres without ever losing control of their narrative. To recreate Cowboy Bebop isn't necessarily an impossible feat, but the only part of it consistent enough to really do so is the story itself. It's a little ironic that an actual remake of it seems not to have much interest in doing that, but I've already made my point about why they shouldn't, so live and let die, I guess. I love Cowboy Bebop, I really do, so it might sound weird when I say that I think it's a good thing this show just can't be replicated. Singular works of art inspire cheap imitation, but they also drive art forward as a whole. For every few dozen people who watch Cowboy Bebop and think, I want to make something just like that, there's the hope of even one who thinks, I want to make something as special as that. The precipice of creative explosion is the understanding that it's right there. All it takes is a dedicated storyteller, willing and able to think outside the box. I don't have the credibility as a media historian or the talent as an amateur anthropologist to draw the through line from Cowboy Bebop to the golden age of anime that followed not too long after its release, or highlight the impact it had on fusing retro aesthetics into science fiction. But I have watched Cowboy Bebop way too many times. I see little pieces of it in so many things, good and bad. But it's just pieces, always, because Cowboy Bebop is still, and will probably always be, one of a kind.